Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me this evening in the Locher Room. I'm Alan Locher. Emmy Award-winning producer, writer, and director Jody Small is here tonight to discuss her powerful one-hour documentary, The Storm and the Boats, which captures the raw, emotional, and diverse experiences of New Jersey residents during the COVID-19 pandemic. Derived from her Pandemic Stories project, Jody filmed these oral history stories for future generations. The documentary highlights the voices of healthcare workers, elected officials, students, parents, and so many more, offering a personal narrative to the pandemic and its impact on mental health. Please help me welcome to the Locher Room, Jody Small. Hi, Jody.
Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for having me in the Locher Room.
You are so welcome. Congratulations on the documentary.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. It really was a passion project.
Well, take me back to the pandemic and where the first idea for the Pandemic Stories project came from.
So I really, like so many people, felt very sidelined. My background was in news and journalism and doing a lot of educational video stories, museum work, and obviously none of that was happening during the pandemic. And I saw so many helpers during the pandemic: nurses, doctors, medical workers, essential workers. And I thought, what skills do I have that can maybe make a difference? And it occurred to me that I should try to capture oral histories and get these stories while they were very fresh on people's minds to save basically for history, for historic reasons. And I couldn't do that, obviously, because we weren't interacting face to face with people at the time. But the moment that I got my first COVID-19 vaccine, I said, that's it. I'm going to set up a makeshift studio in my basement and I'm going to put it out there and see who wants to share their stories with me. And I am so grateful to those very brave, honest citizens who entrusted me with their very personal, emotional stories. And that's how I started Pandemic Stories Project, really not even thinking about a documentary at that point. Yeah. And kind of calling around to different oral history archives. Hey, would you be willing to take these interviews and preserve them for the future? And so I was doing that, and at the same time kind of begging my videographer, can you please just, do a few more interviews with me? Because obviously, I didn't have any funding at the time. But I'm happy to report that eventually the Rutgers University Oral History Archive really saw the value in this and helped me with some funding through the New Jersey Historical Commission. And so that's how it started.
How did you start to approach New Jersey residents and were they willing, did it take some convincing? Were they, hesitant at all?
Well, so people are people, and it was very mixed. I actually put it out there on social media, said who would like to share their Pandemic Stories project with me. Alan, I even had a sticker that said, I shared my pandemic stories. And some people surprised me and were so anxious to share their stories. Others needed a little coaxing from me. And some would call me and say, are you still doing that? I might be willing to do it. I'm not sure. I kind of want to do it because, it was a big investment of reliving that period. And this came right after, the first year. And so I really tried to select the people quite carefully so that I really had a diverse group in age, in experience, in what they had gone through, because I knew I was limited to the number of people that I would be able to film. So I do believe that viewers will find one person that they feel most connected to when they watch.
Talk about some of the people you interviewed, talk about that diverse group.
Okay, just to give you an idea, there was a gentleman who was just coming out of isolation after having a bone marrow transplant. And he said, I was supposed to be coming out of isolation, and then I was told I had to go back in. And I was wearing a mask before it was fashionable. And so his story was very, very sad, but also very poignant, because he spoke about the importance and the value of time and how we spend our lives and the kinds of things that we do. He was angry about people criticizing science, because he felt that medical science had actually saved his life. So that was very interesting. We had restaurant owners who were about to go out of business, and the community gathered around them and helped, through a GoFundMe page, save their restaurant. They in turn said, we want to do something back for our community. And so when people were sending meals, let's say, to the ambulance corps or the fire department, they said, just come to us with whatever money you've collected, tell us how many people, and we'll make meals. And that's exactly what they did. So they really talked about the joy in finding their community support. There was a woman who was televised her story nationally because she had one of the first young people to get COVID. And he was very, very ill. And basically, she had to fight very hard for him to get in the clinical trial for remdesivir. And she did save his life. And, families that had young, daughters and sons in their 20s, in the beginning, they thought, oh, they're safe. This doesn't seem to be happening to that age group. But this was a very big story because of her. The mayor of the town that I live in, she talks about her drive-through double mastectomy with reconstruction surgery. Later, she wasn't allowed to stay in the hospital having a double mastectomy because they didn't want people catching COVID while they were there having other procedures. And that's a surgery where you're in the hospital for several days. And she said she went home that night with, as she put it, a lot of tubes and a lot of drugs to get her through that period. So the stories are just incredible. A police officer from Newark who said he had been shot at, but never as scared as he was lying in that hospital bed with COVID. And I'm just giving you a few stories here. I mean,
how many hours of footage did you collect? And when did you realize you sort of had enough to put the storm and the boats together?
Well, I have 25 plus hours of footage. It is all living at the Rutgers University Oral History Archive and open to the public. And I'm hoping that researchers, filmmakers, historians, educators will, over time, use these oral histories to help them understand these times. It would be great if we had more interviews with people from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. But really all we have are some diaries and things like that. So that's where that footage will live. And people began to say to me when I would have conversations, you wouldn't believe who I interviewed today, and I would tell the stories, and they said, well, you've got to make a documentary out of this. And I thought, yikes, how am I going to do that? And I actually spoke with a producer friend who said to me, Jody, the best way to start is to just start. And so I was thrilled to get some funding from Rutgers University and the New Jersey Historical Commission to begin the work of culling through all that material and creating this 1 hour, pretty powerful film called The Storm and the Boats. And I will tell you, we were all in the same storm, COVID, but we were all in very different boats. And parents with young kids.
Great way to say it. The documentary is punctuated with commentary from is it Dr. Brian Storm?
It's Dr. Brian Strom, actually.
Thank you.
Yes, and he's an epidemiologist and the chancellor of Rutgers Medical School, and has a background in, as a virologist and an epidemiologist. So he was really excellent pointing out why people felt certain ways at certain times because of what was going on medically and in the whole global situation of where we were in the pandemic. And so he really is able to comment on a lot of things, including the mental health epidemic and the fact that we had a shortage of mental health care workers before the pandemic. So as you can imagine, during the pandemic, where one of the physicians that I interviewed, who is a pediatric emergency department doctor, said that department became a psych ward of people suffering from anxiety, depression. And so, telehealth, while it was around, it was truly born during COVID, and we're still using that. That is one of the pluses that came out of, the pandemic. But she said the mental health of people was just heart-wrenching, in the emergency department.
Well, I have a cousin who was a nurse, and I know the toll it took on her. And I think we're not going to know a lot of the toll for many years to come, especially the young kids.
Yes. Alan, I did find some key findings from the Mental Health Association that says 21% of adults are experiencing a mental illness. That's equivalent to over 50 million Americans, and that's from 2023. I'm not sure that number has changed so much in 2024. And with regard to youth, 16% are suffering from at least one major depressive episode in the past year, and that is more than 2.7 million young people experiencing severe major depression. And all you have to do is speak to a teacher about what's going on in the classroom and with young students, and it's the PTSD from the pandemic, for sure.
Well, I mean, what happened in Georgia yesterday for a 14-year-old to, there's definitely some issues, for sure. You studied journalism at Boston University. How do you think your journalism degree helped you on this project?
Well, I feel like my secret sauce is telling stories and capturing other people's stories. And I really love my experience at Boston University a few years ago. And I was a broadcast journalism student, and I ended up with pretty much a dreamy job working for CBS in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, WUSA.
WUSA.
What led you into journalism? Was there someone you used to watch growing up, or?
There were some people that I watched growing up. I was also on my school newspaper. Some of it was that I really loved acting, and my parents said, "You're not going to do that, so pick something else." And I just thought it would be kind of, you know, interesting to pursue journalism and broadcast journalism. And my first job was in my hometown radio station, WMAS AM FM, doing news at 4 a.m., starting at 4 a.m. Um, yeah, and the opportunity at WUSA TV was amazing.
Well, before we get there, who are some of the mentors who've helped you along the way?
Oh my goodness, so far. Do you want me to name them, or?
Yeah, I mean, if there's somebody, some who stand out, who've had a great impact on your career, or.
Yeah, well, one person that I would say who's, one of several would be Ray Farr, who was the director of the permanent exhibit at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And she was in charge of the whole permanent exhibit. And I was director of film and video under her. We were the founding staff members. We were there when they were still putting the bricks on the building and setting up all the exhibits. And she has been a wonderful mentor to me. And I've worked with a lot of really, really wonderful people. And I've had some amazing clients as well who've taught me things. And I really enjoyed doing the films at the New Jersey Vietnam Era Educational Center in Homedale. It's a great museum. And I did a centerpiece film there, which has a lot of oral histories from New Jersey Vietnam vets and their families. And also another film there that was narrated by Adrian Cronauer, which is the gentleman who Good Morning Vietnam is based on, with Robin Williams.
Yeah.
And that is basically a day in the life of a GI. Getting off the plane in Vietnam. So that, and then several other Holocaust museums and that I've worked on, and lots of educational work for some of the publishers. And, I feel very, very grateful for the opportunities that I've had. I really do.
Awesome. How did you end up in DC at WUSA?
Well, while I was at Boston University, I worked for Senator Paul Tsongas from Massachusetts. I had a semester working with his press secretary, and I was an aide to her. And I fell in love with Washington, D.C. then. And obviously, it's a great place for a journalist and wonderful training ground. And my husband and I literally packed up a U-Haul and moved to DC. And yeah, it was a long time ago, but it was wonderful.
Do you remember some of your favorite stories that you covered there?
I do. I covered a story. We did a series called Why Won't They Come Home? And it was about Vietnam vets who chose to stay in Southeast Asia after the war. Many of them were treated better in Bangkok than they were coming home to America. Some of them just felt that the lifestyle was better for them. The stories were as different as each one of them. So that was a great series, and it aired on the Gannett stations around the country. Another piece I did was called The House That John Built, and that's where I won my Emmy Award. And that referred to John Thompson, coach of the Georgetown Hoyas, and how his basketball players were really so much more to him than basketball players. He knew they were having an amazing opportunity being able to be at Georgetown University. And he had tutors on the sidelines. And if you didn't do well in school academically, you were not playing. And he really, he said he made men out of these boys. And so that was really, very interesting. And another series that I thought was very impactful was called No Minor Crime. And that was a series about young Black men who at the time were dying in record numbers, and this was in the 1980s due to gun violence. And many of them felt that, and drugs, the drug war basically, and they, just didn't know that they were ever going to live even to 30 years old. So they did the things they wanted to do young, whether it was stealing a boombox radio or whatever, and unfortunately landed in prison. And so we interviewed them about their experiences and what was going on at the time in some of the very tough areas of Washington, D.C.
I mean, telling gun violence stories in the 1980s, and here we are in 2024 still talking about gun violence stories.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very sad indeed.
That's a sad statement. Journalism being sort of at the forefront in so many conversations these days. Is there some, network, person, station you turn to that you trust?
Well, I feel that journalism is not what it was when I was a journalist. Opinions were not tolerated. I mean, even in tests and, you just give it to me straight and let the viewer decide. So I'm very frustrated. And as you know, so many newspapers are going out of business, and I think social media has taken over as news, and now many of the major networks obviously are very much siding with their point of view, and so I think it's very hard to get the kind of journalism that one might be seeking.
Yeah, well, you really did get just the news back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You really did. So talk about your work at the Holocaust Museum. So you were there before they even opened.
Yes, I was.
And you were responsible for video, all of the video in the museum?
So the permanent exhibit had at the time about 70 monitor productions and 3 major films. And I believe that I was brought on board because I had taken a course with Elie Wiesel when I was at Boston University. And I think that helped a little bit.
Wow.
And at the time, the director of the museum, Sheikha Weinberg, had me come in for many, many interviews, or it felt like many, many, because I had to find a way to get out of the newsroom. And, the assignment desk is standing there waiting to send you somewhere. And I knew that I somehow had to say that I had a toothache or something so I could leave and, go on these interviews. But I also knew it was the opportunity of a lifetime. And I'm so grateful that I was selected for the work. And I believe it was because we had about 2 years to finish up the work. Much of the research was done. We still needed to look for more film, but so much was in, and they realized we needed to get started. And so I think my journalism background of deadlines and quick turnaround really helped me secure that job.
Wow. What was that experience like working for the Holocaust Museum?
Well, first of all, I worked with many brilliant people who I still admire to this day. It was very heavy. So much learning was going on for me because while I had some knowledge, I was not an expert on the topic, but everyone I worked with was. And so when I was choosing and selecting photos, I had photo archivists and historians with me to say, this is what happened, in Babi Yar, or these are photos, those photos are not real. There's some discussion about, them, having some issues or whatever. And my boss, Ray Farr, who I mentioned before, knew so much about all of the film footage. And so working with these people and working with that material every day was very heavy and hard. And to this day, I could still quote some of the parts of our testimony film, which is the oral history films that are toward the very end of the exhibit. It's a theater set in Jerusalem stone. Working there really, it changes you. It really changes you.
I bet. And those oral history are not the same as the Shoah history, right?
So the Shoah Foundation collects, oral histories from all over the world and all of that. But at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, what we did was people were going and looking at smaller collections, which kind of fed into me wanting to do this because 25 hours isn't that much, relatively speaking. But there were 15 people that I interviewed. And we went to some very small, oral history Holocaust, survivor history testimonials, and said, we want this person and that person, and we want him because he's a partisan, and we want her because she was a hidden child, and then went back. And at the time, the filmmaker, Sandra Bradley, we hired her to go on film, literally, not videotape, these individuals who all paid a very big price for retelling their stories. I mean, for them to have to go and relive that was very brutal. And so we use smaller collections and larger collections like the Shoah Foundation to make our selections of who would be in that final film. But now, I don't know if you've heard, like, they're taking some of the film from the Shoah Foundation and using AI and making the people look, as though they're sitting there answering questions for young people.
It's wild. My parents, we convinced them to do the Shoah Foundation, and that, they're glad they did it. I mean, they're no longer with us, but you could tell that it was very difficult. And I think it was very difficult also because the people who interviewed them were strangers. And I encourage anybody watching this, interview your family yourself, talk to them. You get so much more. Like, if I really had, known that, limited time with your family and to get the stories, that your own history, it's so important. Like, even just, the families that you interviewed for, your documentary, it is part of their story now. And now you have it on tape. But it's an interesting thing to just sit and talk and let people share their stories. But having them relive the Holocaust is just something completely different.
I mean, Holocaust survivors may not sleep for a month or 2 weeks before they actually had to share their stories. In my situation, I kind of put it out there to see who wanted to share their story. And many of them, almost all, told me after, Alan, this was so therapeutic. Thank you. I feel I've gotten it all out now. And I would say, great, thanks. Now it's on me. But,
which I think is so great.
Pardon me?
I don't think people realize, in sharing, how it can be cathartic. Whatever story, whatever life trauma or something, speaking about it. I know you're shopping the documentary to festivals. What is your hope for The Storm in the Boats?
So my hope for The Storm in the Boats is really that in many, many years to come, it will be valued as a place where people can look and find out what people's lives were really like when children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren say, what was it like then? You know, we really didn't have anything from the 1918 flu, you know, the pandemic then. And it might have been nice to be able to watch something that people had filmed. I think a lot of people felt hopeless at times. Is this ever going to stop? Are we ever going to get through this? What kinds of things could we do to pass the time or put value in our lives during that period of isolation? And, you know, I hope that this will be part of the permanent historical record, certainly in New Jersey and everywhere, because it was a labor of love and passion. And I'm so glad that I got the people early on when they could totally remember, you know, the details, because we had the opportunity to show my film at a community center in my town. And inevitably, when people see this film and people talk about how the Amazon boxes came and we didn't touch them and we put them in the garage and we were washing and wiping down the bananas, there's like this almost chuckling. I forgot about that, which is a good thing that we forgot, right? And that we're not doing that anymore. And when people talked about washing their hands and singing happy birthday, so they were sure that, you know, they had washed their hands enough. You know, there's just this, wow, I remember that type feeling. And then, of course, there's the sadness. And, you know, for young families with young children, this was a very chaotic time. And one of the young moms that I interviewed had become very ill. And she was in the hospital, and she said she told the nurse, listen, I have a baby at home. And she had has 3 children. I have a baby at home. I can't die. And the nurse said, I am going to do everything I possibly can to save you. And you can imagine, and she was one of the first people that they pronated, turned on her stomach to release the air to go to the lungs. And she said that what she remembers most was not that trip to the hospital, but her anxiety that she felt for so many days and weeks and months, you know, worrying about who would take care of her children if something happened to her. And just, you know, she said she would take her van and go driving in the Costco. She would say goodbye to her husband. I've got to go driving. And she'd take her car and just drive around the Costco parking lot for some peace, looking for peace of mind. And for young mothers and fathers, this was, you know, very, very tough. And on the contrary, somebody in the film mentions there were the winners of the pandemic, and they were the couples who had each other. They had jobs. They could work remote. They traveled. They went on bike rides and hiking and trips. And, you know, that wasn't happening for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it covers such a wide spectrum. I mean, we all, like I said at the start, it's such different experiences. Everybody, you know, depending on where you know, lived, where, you know, who was in your house, if you were alone, if you, you know, had children, if you
Yes.
ended up, you know, if you sadly had and ended up with COVID and ended up in the hospital, you know, the people you said who had surgeries and bone marrow and mastectomies, you know, crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy
I was one of the
time.
lucky ones who had my older son come back home for a couple of months. And, you know, it was horrible for him, but it was great for us, you know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think about it. I, you know, luckily moved back to New Jersey in 2015. We used to live in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 15th floor in New York City. It would have been a completely different experience up on that floor working, two of us in a small 1-bedroom apartment.
Oh,
You
yes.
know, it made me very grateful for this house. So I put up the Facebook page. People can follow you there to learn more when the documentary will be out, correct?
Yes, we're waiting to hear very anxiously on a bunch of festivals, and we should know
Good.
soon about that. And I do hope the film will end up in the education space or streaming, and I'm working on that. So lots of excitement ahead for this film, and I think it really is an important film, and hopefully will help people to move forward once they watch this and see how far we've actually come since the pandemic. And, hopefully more healing will take place as a result.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you so much for being here, Jody. Such a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, and thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Continued success with The Storm and the Boats.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to Jody Small for the incredible hard work capturing this story, the raw, emotional, and diverse experiences of my home state's residents during the COVID-19 pandemic. I am heading out on vacation on Saturday with my family, and we'll see you back here on September 18th when Frank DeCopolis joins me live to honor their 15th anniversary of the final episode, 15,762 of Guiding Light. If you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, you can do so down below. You can turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And if you like to stream, to download audio versions, just search The Locker Room on your favorite podcast app. Have a great evening. Have a great week. And please, as always, everybody stay safe.